Hey there friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andy, and today I thought it was time to take a long, hard look at the universe of expansion packs for Europa Universalis 4 and rank each and every major one of them. The thing about EU4 is that it's a massive game that's already been out for 8 years with no real imminent end in sight. It's almost unfathomable how many expansions this game has, not even counting the smaller unit packs. As someone who has over 2,000 hours in the game and own every single piece of DLC, I thought I'd tell you which ones are worth it and which ones are not. Now I'm going to give a short overview over each expansion and rank them short and to the point so that you may get to know exactly what they each provide and how good of a DLC they are. And if that sounds good to you, I hope you leave a like and a comment down below. And now, EU4's massive catalog of expansion DLCs. The first expansion to come EU4's way was Conquest of Paradise in January 2014, and holy smokes, that's a long time ago. Conquest of Paradise essentially brought 4 new aspects of the game. You could now have the Americas be completely randomized, which is a cool idea, but honestly never as fun as just having the Americas be the one we know and love already. We could also play as the Native American nations now, but really their gameplay situation was never as unique as they should have been, which means that at this stage, it didn't feel like much of a change from the nations you played as before. The best thing about Conquest of Paradise had to do with the colonial nations. You could now manage and play them, and these last 2 aspects are honestly what sells this DLC, even though it's very rare that anyone plays their colonies. In short, Conquest of Paradise is bare bones compared to newer DLC, and with very little that actually appeals, unless you want to play as Native American tribes or as colonies. That's why Conquest of Paradise gets an E tier. The next expansion is the Wealth of Nations DLC, and as you might be able to tell, it comes with some new features related to trade and commerce. The thing is though, there's basically only 1 or 2 actually useful mechanics here, and those are the ability to improve your trade power in inland nodes, ability to establish East India trading companies. Now these 2 can have major impacts on your finances and control of your home region, and are very good add-ons. However, they're not necessarily anything major, and the other features, like the ability to set a specific trade capital, or to fight in trade conflicts and using privateers to steal trade powers from others, are features I rarely, if never, use. Therefore, Wealth of Nations gets a D tier. Then we have the Res Publica expansion, which is a more focused but much better expansion. Res Publica overhauls republics, giving us the opportunity to become republican dictatorships through republican tradition, and opens up an internal republican faction system, allowing us to support the aristocrats, traders, or the guilds. What's more is that this DLC actually makes the Netherlands worth playing, as it gives it a completely unique government system between the status and the oranges, which I very much like. In addition, we get a new exploration idea group, and it allows us to focus on monarch points, which is very useful if you have a lousy monarch. Res Publica, B tier, but only if you play as republics. Otherwise, maybe a D tier. Finally, we get a proper DLC with massive consequences for the game, the Art of War expansion, which adds the all-important 30 Years' War mechanic, potentially forcing the whole Roman Empire into war with the Protestants. But it doesn't stop there, as we also get revolutions in the Napoleonic era, which in addition allows us to create our own custom client states during conquests. We can now also turn vassals into marches, and gives our allies objectives during wars, and even upgrade entire fleets in one go while being able to mothball them. We can now support rebel factions in foreign nations, which is a very handy feature, and so is the possibility to fight for our subjects' casus belli. All in all, Art of War adds a lot of immersive and game-changing events and features, which I really feel makes EU4 that much better. Art of War then, A tier. Now moving on to the year 2015, and this next one is another localized expansion, focusing mostly on Central American faction flavor as well as on colonial nation gameplay. The El Dorado DLC fleshes out the Nahunati, Inti, and Mayan religions, allowing us to send conquistadors to hunt for the 7 cities of gold and other exploration missions. Gold fleets can now ship gold back and forth from the New World, and the Treaty of Tordesillas now rewards Catholic nations that arrive and colonize the New World early, while allowing us to hunt pirates with our trade fleets. There are many different aspects here then, and most of them really good, if, again, you're playing as a colonial or a Central American nation. But the most universal addition is the ability to create your own custom nation, which, if you like that sort of thing, is a very big thing indeed. Eldorado then, B tier. Now on to common sense, which is another major one. Now, Protestants get the ability to create a national church, while Buddhists receive a new karma mechanic. Theocracies get a new devotion mechanic, which increases or decreases their prestige, papal influence, and tax income, and we get deeper subject interactions, which allow us to, among other things, place our dynasty on their throne. More importantly, common sense added parliaments for constitutional republics and monarchies, and a special parliamentary government for England, adding a lot of flavor to those government types. The Holy Roman Empire now has free cities, which can be granted or removed, and we now got government ranks based on the size and power of each nation. Common Sense is a good DLC, which I personally very much love the mechanics of, especially if you're playing as Protestant republics. Common Sense then, another B tier. Now the name of the Cossacks DLC doesn't really tell you how much of change this expansion brings with it. Of course we get fleshed out Horde mechanics, which allows us to raise territories, and a Horde unity mechanic, including even a Tengri religion. But, and this is a big one, we may now play around with estates, which changes everything for internal management of states, forcing you to balance the power of each estate in addition to that of your own. Even though it makes management more difficult, I love the complexity and sense of administration and power balancing it brings, and it feels like it's one of the most important additions to the game ever. We also get to set our own native policies in the New World, and can now more easily change the culture of provinces and understand the AI's goals in wars. That's a B tier because of the estate mechanic, but probably a D tier for everything else depending on whether you like to play as a Horde or not. Moving on, the Mare Nostrum DLC adds a new few features mostly to naval nations. It adds naval missions, which is a big time saver for anyone actually using navies. It adds actual naval missions, which is a big time saver for anyone using navies, as it lets you automate missions which you before had to do manually. So that's kind of a big thing. It adds trade leagues for merchant republics, which is a unique alliance and wealth sharing system, and a big immersive move in my opinion. The DLC allows us now to share maps or have maps shared with us for a better overview of the world, allowing a Barbary States mechanic for North African nations focusing on raiding coastlines, and the Condottieri mechanic lets us rent out armies for other nations' wars. So there are a lot of features here actually, but many of them are rather small, not really that useful, or something you'll never touch depending on whether you're playing as merchant republics or a Mediterranean naval power. That means that Mare Nostrum is a D tier. Now Rights of Man is yet again something with larger additions. We now have a great power mechanic which really lets you mark yourself as a powerful nation once you're one of the 8 strongest states in the world, allowing you to make threats or pay other nations debts for influence, or even join in one-sided wars with at least one major power on each side. Monarchs and military leaders now have personalities which makes them unique and adds bonuses or penalties. We now get to use queens both as monarchs and regents, and what's more is that revolutionary republics now have a faction system, making for a more unique gameplay, while the Ottoman Empire gets a completely unique government form. And leaders can abdicate while states can debase their currency for cash. These are quite massive changes actually, and especially the great power mechanic and personality features, which even determines how the AI acts, providing us with more predictability, and therefore warrants a B tier. Next up, Mandate of Heaven. Mandate of Heaven is a good DLC, but with a very strong focus on East Asian factions like the Ming in China, the Manchu or the Japanese factions, giving us for example the Chinese Empire mechanic, and a much stronger focus on the Shogun and the Daimyos in Japan. In this way it's really quite good. For everyone else though, we get the really cool and flavorful Historical Ages and Golden Eras feature, which I really feel helps to set the different stages of the game apart, and allows for nations to achieve goals to unlock Golden Eras, which can really set your faction apart for a long 50 years. We also get a useful diplomatic macro builder. Mandate of Heaven is therefore a strong DLC, although not vital, but even better if you love East Asia. In that case, it's definitely a B tier, while if not, maybe a C tier. The next DLC is a so-called Immersion Pack, in essence an expansion pack specifically made for certain factions or faiths. This time, Third Rome adds many useful mechanics for Russian factions, like the Tsardom government type, a Siberian frontier mechanic which allows Russia to colonize its eastern border, but most importantly, it really gives the Orthodox Christian faith a massive feature boost, essentially making it one of the coolest religions to play. We not only get iconography, which gives great bonuses depending on the saint we pick, but we also get Metropolitans, which is this minigame with patriarchal power. These are really cool features, and for what they are, they deserve a B tier. But if you don't like Russian or Orthodox factions, this DLC is basically worthless. Even though it's an expansion and not an immersion pack, Cradle of Civilization focuses mainly on the Middle East, which honestly was a much needed update for nations there. We get a new government type and events for the Mamluks, Persia, and the Timurids, and we get Islamic schools where you can choose different directions within Islam for unique bonuses, making Islam a deeper religion. For everyone, we finally get the army professionalism feature, letting us drill armies and make them that much stronger over time, which is frankly a big deal. Other than that though, having trade policies which lets you do other things than focusing on collecting money or exploiting development in states is something I rarely use, so I don't find those features particularly useful, unless you really knee deep in trash and desperately need some last stand coin to save your crumbling, destitute empire. All in all, I give this DLC a C tier. Another immersion pack now, namely Rule Britannia. Unsurprisingly, we're focusing on British factions here, but there's actually a lot of other stuff here that's really good too. With this DLC came a patch which included mission trees, which I absolutely love, and England and the other island nations get updated expansion mission trees, which are all fun to explore. We get the Anglican religion, which appears during the Reformation, and for everyone else, the innovativeness mechanic creates a fun technology race which gives you a bigger boost the more ahead you are. A new naval doctrine mechanic lets your navies focus on certain aspects of the navy, depending on your focus like trade or warfare, and the Industrial Revolution feature makes coal appear during the late game. Lastly, factions can now help other factions promote the spread of institutions in their provinces, and we get some truly awesome new music. This is a wonderful expansion in my opinion, and deserves an A tier. Next up is Dharma. Dharma focuses for the most part only on Indian states and religions, which is always good for those players, but for everyone else, we got a reworked policy system, a few more ways to design your government when you have enough points to upgrade, and features related to trade and charter companies, allowing for more diverse gameplay in the overseas financial sense. It's an okay DLC, but a weird mix of solid Indian focus and some minor other things here and there. Dharma is a D tier. Now we've reached Golden Century, another immersion pack focusing this time on Iberian and North African nations. The former can now establish holy orders like the Jesuit, Franciscan, or Dominican orders to govern their states, which reduces unrest and makes religious conversion easier. They also get a new mission trees, which makes for a more immersive experience, something which I appreciate on account of absolutely loving mission trees. The same goes for nations in Northwest Africa. In addition, we actually get to play as pirate nations now, who bring their own playstyle. We may expel minorities to colonies to ease the colonization abroad and the unrest at home, and we may even appoint a flagship in our navy, which is an especially powerful ship, and use our navies in sieges to bombard castle walls. Personally, I love these features, and the pack even includes a ton of new Iberian and Berber unit and ship models. Golden Century therefore definitely deserves a B tier, especially considering the low price. Finally, we reach the Emperor expansion, which is quite literally the best EU4 expansion ever. Not only do we finally get a complete revamp and expansion of the Holy Roman Empire with diverging paths to take between centralization and decentralization, but there are new events and even more imperial states to think of. There are now new ways to deal with the revolution or the resistors of it, new mechanics related to being the defender of the faith is added, and there are more ways to deal with the Protestant Reformation. This last point brings us to the revamped papal system, which lets us appoint cardinals, publish papal bulls, and choose the direction of the Catholic Church for the duration of the current pope, and the Papal States can now gather holy tides, making it actually fun to play as the Papal States. But there's more. If you become extremely powerful in certain areas, you can become an hegemon, solidifying your standing as not only a great power, but as a true superpower. There are also over 20 new unique mission trees for varying European nations, and new ways to deal with rebellions by provoking them, in addition to many new events. Emperor is a truly solid expansion overall, and is the only EU4 expansion that deserves an obvious S tier. S for Emperor. Lastly, oh how the mighty have fallen. Leviathan was supposed to be a page-turner for EU4, and a new start for the newly created Paradox Tinto studio in Barcelona. Sadly though, this DLC turned out a buggy mess. On paper though, there's a whole ton of stuff here. We were supposed to be able to use the favor mechanic to have other nations do your bidding, specialize our colonies in order to make them stronger military or as trading partners, steal development from our vassals and bring it back home, doing the same with the enemy capitals, expanding infrastructure, making smaller nations much easier to make wealthy and self-reliant, found great monuments, carpet siege enemy provinces, centralize our state, and more. There's actually a lot here, but sadly, everything was messed up by the accompanying patch, which made the game completely unplayable and utterly broken. This easily makes the DLC an F tier at launch, but with the later patches a few months later, most of the worst bugs should now be fixed, perhaps elevating it to something of a D tier unless your game is broken still. Phew. Hot darn, that was literally 8 years of EU4 expansion DLCs. Now EU4 is one of my favorite games of all time, and even though many of these are not the best, every single one adds something new to the experience, and your mileage will absolutely vary depending on which factions you like to play as. I've greatly enjoyed my time with most of these, even though some of them clearly accomplish more than others. I do wish to add that even though a lot of people give Paradox a lot of flack for their DLC policy, I'm personally not that much against it. This game has been out for 8 years, with a ton of free patches releasing alongside every expansion, making the EU4 of today, even without any paid expansion enabled, a completely different beast than the EU4 of 2013. I think the DLCs are a small price to pay for a living and evolving game such as this, even though it's completely fair to discuss the price, or indeed overpricing, of certain content packs. Now I've told you my opinion, but what about yours? Do you completely disagree with me, or do you have another favorite than mine? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, friends, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!